Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, my special guest today is the former US Congressman Albert Wynn, who served as a member of the US House of Representatives for 16 years, serving on the powerful House Energy and Commerce Committee, the Foreign Committee, and as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee. He's a Democrat and a strong supporter of President Joe Biden, and as Mr. Biden's first 100 days in office draw ever closer, we'll speak to Congressman Albert Wynn about his career and about the Democrats' ambitious agenda in the Biden era in a moment. And later, as the putrescence of corruption continues to pollute successive governments in Nigeria, the Senate approves President Buhari's new head of the country's anti-graft body, rebooting his government's bid to rein in corruption. But as graft continues to drain billions from Nigeria's coffers and undermine its capacity to combat violent insecurity and to attract international investment, we ask, what difference will the new anti-corruption czar make? We have reaction and analysis. And later still, a case of political intrigue at the very highest level in Scotland, which is part of the UK. The government there is embroiled in a bitter feud involving sexual assault allegations, a crisis of credibility, and a split within the governing party. So how big a threat is this to the whole Scottish government? We'll speak to our correspondent, who is herself Scottish, coming up. Now, my first guest today is the US Congressman Albert Wynn, who is currently a senior director at the law firm Greenberg Traurig LLP. Congressman Wynn joined the law firm after serving 16 years as a member of the House of Representatives. He represented Maryland's 4th Congressional District. During his last 12 years in the House, he served on the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee, and more recently as chairman of its subcommittee on environment and hazardous materials, and as a member of the subcommittee on energy and air quality. Earlier in his congressional career, he was a member of the Financial Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. He was appointed a senior Democratic whip and served as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee. Quite a lot of committees there, and quite a career there for a black man from Montgomery County in Pennsylvania. And I'm suitably delighted to say that Congressman Albert Wynn joins me now from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for making the time to talk with us. And I have to say I'm slightly intimidated by the achievements that you've had in a reasonably short space of time. Just tell us how you've evolved in your career.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you this morning. In terms of how I've evolved in my political career, I've always, since a very young age, been interested in politics. I was fortunate enough to be elected to the Maryland State Legislature at a relatively early age. I served 10 years, and then I was elected to Congress and had the opportunity, as you indicated to your audience, to serve for 16 years. And it was a great honor, and we hopefully got some good things done.
Well, I mean, that's putting it rather mildly, isn't it? You got quite a lot of things done. I mean, there's so much to talk about with you today. First of all, from, you obviously being a young African American at the time, and, moving through the challenges and the political ranks of the Democratic Party. I mean, when you got into politics, you were, in a field of many primary candidates, and you beat them with 1,300 votes, and then went on to win a resounding victory in the general election. I mean, that's not to be sniffed at, is it?
Well, no, I consider myself very fortunate and blessed in that regard. We worked extremely hard, and fundamentally, my approach to politics is to stay close to the people, which is to say, we ran what we call a retail campaign, focusing more on actually contacting and talking to people, meeting people in communities, in their local stores, that sort of thing, to build a relationship of trust that people felt, hey, this guy is actually out here working with us, talking with us, engaged with us. I think the energy that we brought and that attitude of, we are here with you, paid big dividends. It was somewhat a philosophical difference, because a lot of people focus on signs, a lot of people focus on TV and radio. We had all of that, but the foundation of our effort was really walking the streets in the morning, in the evenings, in the shopping centers, in the barber shops. We would go wherever people were and be able to have a conversation. That's how I got started in terms of my congressional career, because I thought it was absolutely essential that people know who I was. In a big field of candidates, how do you stand out? You stand out by operating a little differently. In my case, it was a massive retail campaign on the streets.
Now, thank you for that summary, by the way. A maddeningly intractable problem in America appears to be the race issue: white, black, brown, red, and yellow. Particularly for people in Africa, they see pictures of white on black police brutality and lots of problems around racial discrimination. Yet they also see lots of African Americans like yourself making incredible strides and achieving tremendous success. I mean, you were a congressman for many years, and the US has had a black president and now a black vice president. I mean, where does the problem lie?
Well, first of all, I'd like to accentuate the positive. We have made tremendous progress in this country. And you cite the elected officials, myself included, and mayors and governors and what have you. Not so many governors, but we've made a lot of progress. That's an area where we have to make more progress. But fundamentally, America has never come to grips with the issue of race as it pertains to African Americans and the terrible history of slavery. That has not been resolved. But then you have the internment of the Japanese. You have historical incidents, the treatment of Native Americans. There has been a pattern in which minority groups have been exploited and discriminated against and face barriers to participation. Nonetheless, and I'm very proud as an African American that despite all we've gone through, we have been able to enter the mainstream of not just politics, but of business, of course, athletics and entertainment, but across the board in American society. My sense is that African Americans are full participants. Now, oftentimes, maybe it's not as easy as it should be or as fair as it should be. But nonetheless, we've made tremendous progress, and we're in a position, as I look at this new generation, the Black Lives Matter movement, I see very encouraging signs that both from our own proactive efforts as African Americans and also the receptivity of a greater majority of Americans toward eliminating racism, that all of that says to me we're making progress.
Well, I mean, if you were to follow, as a lot of people around the world do, follow the stories emerging out of America about race relations, the impression an outsider would have is that African Americans are wretchedly unhappy because of a sort of grotesque misalliance of races where they are at the bottom of the heap. Is that how Black Americans see it?
I don't think so. I think because we have experienced this over generations, number one, we recognize the progress starting before Martin Luther King, but certainly Martin Luther King represented a watershed in terms of our efforts to throw off the yoke of oppression, systemic institutional segregation, all of those hindrances. We've moved past that. And now we're looking at, again, a younger generation that sees a broad array of opportunities, the ability to do literally anything that you want to do. Is it hard? Yes. Is it hard for African Americans? Without question. But is it doable? Absolutely. And I would say the majority of African Americans have an optimistic view of their personal future, although at the same time, there's a very strong and legitimate critique of racism in America that we're addressing. And I'm glad about that. I'm glad that we're addressing the question of race in America, but more importantly, I'm glad white people are addressing the issue of race in America.
Well, obviously, Congressman, we're going to be talking about a lot more than just race in America. But I mean, just to end the segment with that discussion, we've got about a minute before we have to take a break. Would you say that the issue of race defines America, that because it defined America in the past, it still determines to a large extent the country's future? And we've got about 30 seconds.
I think America is a unique experiment as a result of slavery and other factors, where we are trying to create a heterogeneous community, as opposed to most countries are homogeneous in race and in religion and ethnicity. That's not the case in America. America is a melting pot. It's a lot of different groups. And there are obviously problems when you try to have a heterogeneous society. But I think for the most part, we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, do stay with us, Congressman Wynn. We would be very delighted to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the U.S. Congressman Albert Wynn, member of the House of Representatives for 16 years. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyekulu. Now, my first guest today, U.S. Congressman Albert Wynn, made history in 1992 by entering and winning a crowded 7-way Democratic primary by 1,300 votes. He went on to win the general election by 75% of the vote and was re-elected 7 times, never dropping below 75% of that vote. Prior to being elected to Congress in 1992, Representative Nguyen was a Maryland state senator for 6 years and a Maryland state delegate for 10 years. And all this while he was a principal in the law office of Albert R. Wynn and Associates. During the 105th U.S. Congress, Mr. Wynn sponsored legislation passed to improve federal contracting opportunities for small and minority businesses, and he has twice received the Small Business Administration's Leadership Award for his efforts on behalf of small businesses in America. And Congressman Albert Wynn is still with me from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. So let's look forward and not back. Where do you see America heading, given all the things that happened during the last 4 years of President Trump?
Well, the most important thing we have to do is deal with the virus, and that's what is happening right now. Congress is in the process of passing a massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, rescue bill, if you want. That's going to be very important because that's going to deal with increasing access to vaccines, upgrading our healthcare systems generally to provide greater access, opening up our schools, strengthening our small businesses. There's a lot of money to help small businesses. We've targeted that as a key area where we have to get the economy going again. So this bill is designed to move us away from or through or past, however you want to describe it, the COVID crisis, and prepare us to move to the next phase, which will be a major infrastructure bill that President Biden has been advocating to rebuild our roads, bridges, broadband communications infrastructure, to deal with climate change. We'll also deal with questions of a green economy and transitioning to a green economy. So there are a lot of challenges ahead, but the country's definitely feeling more positive after 4 chaotic years. We're now looking toward greater unity, a return not so much to normalcy, but a return to a more stable approach, a less personal approach, a more institutional approach to governing. And I think that's going to yield benefits. I think this bill will pass probably by mid-March. There'll be changes, there'll be debates. There's no question about that. But at the end of the day, we're going to put a lot of money into moving through and out of this pandemic. And then we're going to look at challenges for rebuilding and rejuvenating the economy.
And what about the challenge of Donald Trump? I mean, you're in the second month of a new year. I mean, can it now be reasonably confidently said that America is now in a post-Trump world, or is it unclear if Donald Trump is going anywhere anytime soon?
Well, I engage in a lot of these conversations, and what I like to say is the Democrats defeated Donald Trump. It did not defeat Trumpism. There were 74 million Americans who supported Donald Trump, despite his flaws, despite some of the mismanagement that we saw. And so there's a sentiment there that has to be addressed. There are elements of it that have some legitimacy. But fundamentally, I think the cult of personality that Donald Trump represented is no longer a dominant force in America. What remains the Trumpism is the idea of America first. Some people have a resistance to immigration. These types of things, a continuation of a fossil fuel driven economy, those are all elements of Trumpism. there's a certain isolation that people in rural communities feel that they're not necessarily connected to their government or to the leaders. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to embrace all Americans, urban and rural. And in so doing, I think we can move past the era of Trump. But the individual, the man is down in Florida at his resort, but we're still grappling with some of the divisions that he left behind.
But of course, you yourself were accused at one point, although pre-Trump, of being too Republican, because, I mean, you voted to support the Iraqi war and also supported the Bush administration's energy bill. I mean, people saw you as too conservative and too closely allied with the Republicans. I mean, how did you deal with that?
Well, that doesn't bother me because I consider myself a centrist. But fundamentally, I'm concerned with getting things done. Let's take the energy bill that you mentioned. We put some measures in there, I and some others, that were really helpful to low-income people, low-income energy assistance, for example. So the question becomes, is getting low-income energy assistance more important than the benefits that the oil and gas companies gained in that bill? And they did gain some benefits. When I look at a measure, I look at what's good for my community. In the case of my community, more assistance for energy, paying electricity bills, heating homes was the most important thing. There's some people today, however, who tend to focus on what the other guy got. Well, but the other side got tax breaks. Well, in politics, it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody has to get something. And if you focus on blocking what the other guy wants more so than you focus on what you can achieve for your constituency, you tend to make really brilliant speeches about how bad the other side is. But at the end of the day, you don't have a product to deliver to your community. My job, or I felt at the time, my job as congressman was to deliver for my community. So I always looked at things for that prison. Look, we'll go to the war real quickly. I did not like the idea of the war, but again, if there had been weapons of mass destruction, the community that would have been most affected would have been the African-American community, because if there's an attack on this country with a chemical weapon, if there had been, of course, African-Americans would have been folks who were hurt the most, because we use the public transportation system. We have the most challenges with regard to the healthcare system. So a chemical attack would have been devastating. So that was a preemptive vote, in my opinion. It was the wrong vote. I believe we were misled in terms of the intelligence about whether there was whether there were weapons of mass destruction. But I consider that the worst vote of my career in hindsight. But at the time, my district was is right next geographically to the Capitol, and my community uses mass transportation. If there had been an attack on our subway system, my constituents, blue-collar workers, service industry workers who are on their way to work would have been the most harmed, and that was the basis for the vote. But the real problem was we got bad intelligence, because I was not the only person who viewed the intelligence this way. A lot of people, including the current majority leader, on the House side, voted the same way. John Kerry, now in the Biden administration, voted the same way. A lot of us evaluated bad intelligence that we'd received and made the best judgment we could.
Well, it's all very, very interesting, and I would love to talk with you a whole lot more, but unfortunately we're out of time. But it would be great to have you back again, because there's so many other issues I wanted to get to, including your time as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee and what that might have meant or potentially means for Africa. But sadly, we're out of time. But Congressman Albert Wynn, I want to thank you exceedingly. You're watching The Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including reaction to the Nigerian Senate's approval of President Buhari's new head of the country's anti-graft body, the EFCC. Stay with us.